Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where we are going to look at how to call a GraphQL enabled API from process model as well as forms. GraphQL is a query language for your API and a server-side runtime for executing queries using a type system you defined for your data. GraphQL was developed internally by Facebook in 2012 before it was publicly released in 2015. It is nowadays used by a lot of organizations to create their APIs. So we are going to look at how you can consume a GraphQL enabled API with an AgilePoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the app builder. I have a sample application created over here. I've already set up the sample application with a couple of manual steps so that we can save some time. On the first step, I have just one text box field which captures the currently logged in username, and I'm going to use this variable to fetch additional information about this user on the subsequent screens as well as process. So just a test screen. On the second one, I've got three sections over here. The first section, I'm going to call a publicly available Graph API to get details about the missions and the launch date of SpaceX programs. On the second section, I'm going to show the value which I have retrieved from a Windows Azure Active Directory GraphQL endpoint based on the username which was captured in the previous step. And I'm going to get these values from the process model. And I'm going to repeat the same thing using a form lookup as well. So that's what we are going to configure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the web services stencil and drag and drop a REST service shape. This REST service activity can be used to call a GraphQL API as well. So I'm going to call it SpaceX. I'm going to use advanced configuration mode. I'm going to copy the GraphQL endpoint over here, which is exposed in any of the documentation. This is a post request as per their documentation, and it does not need any sort of authentication in this case. Now this one, it expects a payload schema. You can get it from the documentation of the web service or the GraphQL service. I'm going to copy it. Click next. Now I can do simulation. So I'll select the simulation option. Instead of entering the sample response manually, I'm going to say simulated. I'm going to hit simulate button, or the API URL looks okay to me. And this is the response which is being sent by this API. So I'm going to just go ahead and click save. And then I'll do map to schema. Now what it does is it takes that simulated response structure. I could have manually copied and pasted it from the documentation as well, of course. But I decided to simulate it so that it just brings in enough information for me, which is needed by my form. So you see it is a repeating node. I'm going to map it to my repeating subform node over here. I want to map mission name to mission name and launch date to launch date. And that's about it. This part is done. I'm going to go ahead and click finish. I'm also going to call one of the authenticated services. I'm going to drag and drop another activity. I'm going to call it WAD, Windows Azure Active Directory. Again, go for advanced configuration. I'm going to copy the URL of my GraphQL API. In this one, I'm going to retrieve users information, and the user name would be passed as a variable as I mentioned. And I want to retrieve these four values back from the GraphQL. These all things are available in their API documentation itself. So I'm going to just form my GraphQL query. You can of course use a Postman to create your GraphQL query, test it out, and then copy it over here if you wanted to do it that way. Now this is a GET request, and this is protected with authentication. So I'm going to go to OAuth2, select the kind of token. It's Windows Azure Active Directory. I've already set up one over here. Click next. This one does not expect a payload to be passed because the values are already being passed in the URL. That's why the payload section is disabled. Next, it asks me how do I want to store my schema. Now I can store it in a custom attribute as I said, or I can provide a sample JSON response format or XML response format over here and then create a map to schema, or I can get it from simulation. I always prefer getting it using simulation myself. So I'm going to go ahead and do simulation. I'm going to pass in a sample value. You see I'm passing in the name of one of my users, John Smith. So I'm going to simulate this with some sample value, and it brings back the required information for me. I'm going to click on save and then select map to schema. Now in this case, because this is being returned by the process, I'm going to map it to the variable's name with PD for me. So given name to first name, surname to last name, preferred language to preferred language, and email to email. So once this is done, I'm going to go ahead and click finish. So the process level configuration is done. Similarly, I can call the same API from the form level as well. So I'm going to open this form, and I'm going to add an auto lookup over here in this section. I'll say get user info, add a new data source. This is of type REST service. I'm going to go for advanced configuration, give it a nice looking name. Because I'm interested in retrieving multiple values back, I'm going to say this is a multi-column lookup, and repeat a similar kind of a configuration. So we'll say call the URL passing in the variable in the username. This will be of type get, use auth to authentication. Here is the token which is available. Then go to the request tab. As I mentioned, there's nothing required in the request tab. That's why it is disabled. The response, I can again either enter the payload manually or I can get it from simulation. I'm going to simulate it. For simulation, I'm going to use the same user. Click simulate. It returns back the response. I'm going to go ahead and click save, and then I'll click on map to schema. Now this is from the form instead of the process, so I'm going to map it to the form fields over here. So once I've mapped these 4 values which I'm interested in, I just go ahead and click finish and say trigger this lookup when the form loads or a related field value changes. So that way I configured both a GraphQL API to be called from process as well as form, and it handled authentication as well. I'm going to go ahead and do save and check in, and I'll publish this application out. I'm going to select the application and hit publish. I'll check in any pending files. Okay, click publish. Next, I'm going to go to Work Center, My Apps. I'm going to bring up my GraphQL app. And as you can see, because my first form just captured the currently logged in username, it did that. I'm going to go ahead and click submit. If I go to inbox, tasks, there is a task which is waiting for me over here. If I open the task, you can see that the process model called the SpaceX API gave me back 2 results, which is shown in a repeating grid. The process model took John Smith's user principal name, gave me back first name, last name, email, and preferred language, and I executed the same call using a lookup on the form as well. So as you can see with the REST connector, it is more like an HTTP connector, and you can call the GraphQL endpoints as well. Thanks a lot for your time.